Joining us now live from Australia, Kai Loyens of Foreign Brief. Good morning, Kai. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Kai, it was never a question of whether Prime Minister May was going to lose. It was how badly. Because depending on the scale of that defeat and the reaction of the Labour front, for example, backbenchers, UK's Prime Minister Theresa May be ushered into a different phase of bargaining across benches. Is May's Brexit deal dead, you think?
Well, by the scale of the defeat, it looks that way. The margin of defeat estimated was initially 100 to 200 votes, but this morning's vote has exceeded all of those estimates. So additionally, with the vote against the deal from her coalition partners, the DUP, it looks very unlikely that she'll be able to secure Parliament's support to get the current agreement as it stands through. She now has 3 sitting days in Parliament to negotiate changes to the plan and possibly seek additional assurances from the European Union on what comes next. But given that they offered legal advice on the issue of the Irish Backstop on Monday to assuage UK concerns that it would only be used for a 1-year period following a transition, this did not appease Labour, DUP or Eurosceptic concerns in Parliament, and that seems to be the reason why she faced such a defeat. And additionally, considering that half of her party voted against it, I can't see that she'd have much luck getting them on side in the next few days.
So, Kai, what exactly is left on the negotiating table now, economically speaking?
Economically speaking, there are a few options. The 3 sitting days gives the Prime Minister time to prevent a total hard Brexit. Additionally, Labour is planning on tabling a plan for a withdrawal agreement that would see the UK retain customs union, and additionally there are also plans from the Liberal Democrats and other members of Labour for a second referendum. But economically it looks like the UK is moving closer to a hard Brexit if general elections and a second referendum are taken out of consideration.
There are factions saying that Brexit could actually spark a recession. How accurate are these concerns? I mean, there's a survey now showing that 1 in every 6 Britons is considering stockpiling food and medicine for Brexit. You've also got some studies predicting that the UK economy could actually be 7.7% smaller 15 years after a disorderly Brexit, and then Capital Economics also saying that a disorderly Brexit could shrink the UK economy by 0.2% this year. Oxford Economics betting it would be 2.1% smaller by the year of 2020. It doesn't look so good with Brexit happening.
It looks terrible. I'd agree with all of that. The IMF projections for this year for UK growth factor in a Brexit deal being passed by Parliament, and even then it's only growth of 1.2%. I think the last 6 months have sort of shown us a little bit of what a no-deal scenario could look like. A slowdown in demand and a rise in inflation has led to a reduction in business investment and consumer confidence. Many auto manufacturers and financial services firms have been relocating jobs, production and offices over the last year. And the IMF and even the Bank of England has estimated that GDP losses could exceed that during the financial crisis, which was between 4 to 6%. So I really wouldn't discount how severe it will be.
Let's talk about why some factions want to leave the EU. One of the battle cries for supporters of Brexit would be it's a tremendous liberation that will supposedly give the UK its own democracy to make its own laws, take back control, make better decisions for itself other than people making it for the bloc. In history, could you pinpoint a certain decision, a policy decision that the UK could have made for itself but missed out on because it was part of the EU bloc?
Personally, I can't say anything on that regard that would change my mind that membership of the EU hasn't been overwhelmingly beneficial for the UK. For the Brexiters, one of the main issues, and it was during the referendum and it still is now in the negotiations of the last 2 years, the issue of trade, whether the UK could have struck better trade agreements on its own. Currently, that's handled by the European Union in Brussels for its 28 member states. And additionally, there's another aspect of immigration, but in the negotiations, Theresa May was forced to compromise on that, and all EU nationals who currently live in the UK are guaranteed the same EU rights as they would be if Britain remained in the European Union. So on the trade front, it remains an interesting future topic of whether the UK could negotiate better agreements. Some countries have expressed interest in doing that with the UK, Australia and New Zealand in particular, as well as the United States. But the amount of time that it would take to negotiate such agreements in the long term.
Yes. Kai, do you think that the EU will allow the UK to stay, for example, in the single market and the customs unit, benefit from this, but be free to strike new trade deals with other big players like the US, China, and India? I mean, others are calling this the soft Brexit or the Chequers deal, which Prime Minister Theresa May had wanted, of course, Chequers being May's hometown. Do you think the EU will allow this?
I see this as being unlikely. The most controversial issue for Conservative MPs was the issue of the Irish Backstop, and that was to prevent a hard border with the Republic of Ireland after the exit. So if any part of the UK were to remain in the customs union, it would restrict their ability to negotiate with other countries on a trade deal. So I can't see if any agreement passes that includes a customs union that the UK would be allowed by the EU to negotiate any such trade agreements with any countries.
So what does a soft Brexit look like then for the UK?
Well, if the agreement had gone through, the situation would be very similar to what we see with Norway and Iceland, who both have access to the single market and customs union, but have no real role in the European Union. If the transition period had entered into effect, Britain, in a soft Brexit scenario, would have retained access to the single market, but it would have been required to implement all EU regulations and legislation, but wouldn't have a say in that process. And Theresa May floated a similar prospect, the Chequers Agreement, about 6 months ago, but that was overwhelmingly opposed by her party.
And you did mention about the Irish backstop, because if you talk about borders, a hard Brexit would have the EU and UK installing a hard border, and Ireland becomes the battlefield because you've got Northern Ireland, for example, part of the UK, the rest part of the EU. What will hard barriers mean?
Hard barriers is the worst situation you can imagine in the whole no deal situation. It would see Britain return, without an extension in the Brexit date in March, it would see Britain return to ordinary trade rules, which would result in tariffs at UK border checkpoints on the English Channel and in Northern Ireland, which would restrict the flow of goods and services. So with a backstop that would prevent, that would keep Northern Ireland in the customs union and prevent the return of a border, which was a major success in the 1998 peace accords, and is one of the reasons why the EU and the Republic of Ireland fought so hard to get the UK to agree to this. But it would be a huge obstacle to trade if any borders were to reappear, and businesses have been stockpiling production and goods in the UK in anticipation of such an outcome. So it looks like many are already preparing for this situation.
But don't you think that with a hard border with the EU, no more free trade, no more free flow with the EU, that new business deals that UK can strike with the US, China, India, for example, do you think these new deals potentially could offset or more than offset what the UK may lose out on when they do leave the EU with Brexit?
Well, many in the Conservative Party seem to believe that that is a possibility, but currently the UK has a surplus in exports of services to the EU and exports most of its goods to the EU. It's a major provider of financial services and automotive exports to the European single market. So in the last year, exports have in fact grown to the EU. So it's actually heightened its dependence on EU trade, while it has been able to do little to actually boost its trade partnership with China, India, and the United States. And it was only until the Trump administration was elected that the US expressed some interest in having a trade agreement with the UK post-Brexit. But the UK is overwhelmingly beholden to the EU from a trade perspective at the moment, and that has been the EU's main bargaining chip in negotiations, that the UK has too much to lose.
And I guess we should always remember and keep in mind that this process is on a clock. I mean, Article 50 has to be concluded by the end of March. Leave with or without a deal. What are the chances that the UK would end up crashing out of the EU?
Well, I think we'll have to wait till Monday evening. I'm not optimistic that Parliament will offer a solution that is much better than the current agreement. It looks like they may take an informal vote on different plans put forth by the different parties. But the March deadline is coming up very quickly, you're correct. The EU is expecting the UK to request an extension, but it's unsure whether that would require unanimous support from the remaining EU heads of state, and some have expressed opposition to that happening. So it looks like the March deadline is still possible, but we did have the decision from the European Court of Justice about 2 weeks ago, which said that Brexit could be cancelled at any time. So there still is a great deal of uncertainty legally and economically over some of the most important aspects.
Okay, and on that note, thank you very much, Kai, for joining us. It's good talking to you. We'll talk to you again when we see more developments in this news. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.